Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear speakers and listeners. I have the great pleasure to welcome you again to the afternoon panel session today, and I have also the great pleasure to have a first guest next to me, which is really great pleasure in a pandemic time, not be online all the time. So our first guest is Mr. Waldemar Affelt, and his topic today will be the Gdańsk Shipyard, a case study on heritage and development. Let me introduce you in a few sentences. Mr. Affelt is a conservator of architectural monuments, retired lecturer at the Gdańsk University of Technology and the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Toruń. He is also visiting senior research fellow at the School of Business and Creative Industries, University of the West of Scotland in Paisley. He is also author of the unique method called Technitas. It's right pronunciation. Yes. It's a unique method for assessing cultural and socio-economic values of heritage in accordance with the Polish legislation and the operational guidelines for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. So please feel free to begin.
Thank you, and good afternoon. My topic was already announced. I have to produce my speech quite quickly. This is agenda, and the most challenging is number 3, when I'm going to present 45 building objects and structures which survived, which were not demolished and were nominated to be inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage List. Let's go to the first step. There is a map which now is not available in the landscape, offering observation to the visitors of the area. Oh, it's going automatically. At first, we are in 1844, when the part of embankment of Vistula River was chosen for the Navy, Prussian Navy, as a depot for winter season. That time winters were quite severe, so it was necessary not to sail, but to keep boats on the land in safe arrangements. Very soon, several years later, the embankment became a shipyard. But that time, nothing was constructed as a solid structure because the area was managed by the authority of city fortifications. They did not allow to build any solid structures in the field of future battle. So it is more or less appearance of the shipyard site of the time. So no structures, but ships were built. And
You want to make it slow?
just move to the next one. Oh, it's a close-up for the same, and situation changed after the First World War, but at the end of the 19th century, the next shipyard was constructed very close to the former one, which was a private investment. It was called the Schichau shipyard. It was most developed shipyard in the southern bank of Baltic Sea, with 5 very long ramps. Outline of the protection. Actually, 21 years ago, the first 4 selected objects were protected by Polish law. Then nothing happened for several years, and new owners took it for granted and started demolishing procedures on 2006. After 2015, the policy addressed to that heritage has changed, and the process of inscription in the state register of monuments started. The final moment of the protection development happened at the end of February last year, when the application to inscribe into the World Heritage List was submitted to the secretary in Paris. Criteria for nomination. The entire file is very intensive. It is 500 pages. I'm just going to only describe the three most important values. This is the title of application and the area. To the right, we see the old Kaiser shipyard, and then Imperial shipyard, and to the left is the private shipyard, the Schichau shipyard. Outstanding universal value was described by use two criteria, number 4 and number 6. This is authentic writing taken from the application. The statement of integrity, however, it is mentioned that is almost half of the previous number of buildings and structures, but still we can observe entire production of the ship in the shipyard. And the statement of authenticity is related to 8 criterion which are described in the guidelines for procedure. So now the most challenging part with over 100 slides. I'm not going to read all of them. We are starting from the right side, so the former state-owned Navy shipyard, Prussian shipyard, and then we will finish on the Schichau. This is close-up of the plan for protection zone. This is a red line, and the yellow line shows the buffer zone. The very early inscribed the gate number 2, historical gate, for the events of the 1980. And the hall of safety and health and safety hall, in Polish language is called Sala BHP, where meeting between governmental and party representatives and striking workers led by Lech Wałęsa took place. The authority of the Royal and Imperial Shipyard, the corner building, is the oldest one from the 70s of the 19th century. And the yard in front of the building is mentioned as a protected object as well, because this is the place of strikes. Here the hunger and will for changing was expressed by working class. On the other side of the yard is a former fire station, very often alterated. And now we are going in order of the row buildings from the embankment side, because there are 2 rows. We will have a chance to have a look inside. There's a huge variety of structures. This is the oldest hall from the 70s of the 19th century, and close up for facade arrangement following slightly masonry with a decoration in palace style. Some other buildings, some are small, some are bigger. They were very often alterated and they changed the purposes. We can see here on the left side two new additions which were erected during the 70s. A very exciting solution of moving wall. The wall made of wooden planks is moved because it is pushed by gantry, and then the building is open and the gantry is allowing to get outside and transport goods to the rails. Some other halls, and they are in quite good state because all are busy now. They are hired by owners for different purposes, for making ships, boats, or at least to have a depot surface. The heavy machine survived in the former forge, and we are going to the only building which survived as a demolished or ruined building. This is that one on the corner on the right, or this one. The very intensive construction for piping. On the first plan we can see it. A very important device for launching ships. This is a basin when a floating dock was necessary and ships were constructed on horizontal ramps. Very few of modern buildings from the 70s survived. This is one example. And behind we can see from the Second World War very functional structure for different purposes in different parts. All structure is casted in reinforced concrete. Next building to that one as well, reinforced concrete, and the area for storing pipes. Another forge and carpentry. Now we are in the part of shipyard of Schichau. Interior. This is the oldest building on the site from the last years of 19th century. Interior. And we are approaching the most exciting part, which is the hugest building which survived, this one. What is unique, I will tell later. And this is the pride of the Polish Republic, People's Republic from the 50s, the completely new hall arranged for working with sheets of steel. Some basins and some piers, and general view, including bridge between island and the area of the shipyard on the land. And this is the very early protected monument to the fallen shipyard workers, along with a wall which was former fence of the shipyard. Now my private comments to the site. At first, demolitions. On the very bottom, we see from the air view the residential quarter, which consists of area of director villa and gardener house and former garage for cars. All red spots means buildings were demolished. They do not exist. This is a master plan of 2004, where the line, white line of new road, goes exactly through the area when residential area was created. So demolition took part during weekend. On Monday, such arrangement to memorizing the structure was done by the artist. And this is empty site for demolition. In terms of integrity, it was important part of industrial site. And the white area on the top is area of the demolitions, but they are not finished. All row of structures and ramps, everything will disappear, even cranes. This is a boiler room from the interwar period. So this is a result of demolitions. Even that side ramp disappeared. However, the launching ship was very exciting to observe. Those buildings were created during interwar period when the shipyard was called Stocznia Gdańska. It was official name given on 1922 because Poland became a part of stakeholding company after demilitarization after World War I. This is the structure of those buildings which vanished. It's a pity we do not have evidences of structures from that interwar period. And that one vanished as well. Mural is very characteristic for the shipyard. It reads safety, healthy and safety provide you daily work, safety, and come home or came home or come home healthy. Uniqueness. This is a lot of written in the application. I would like to point only two things. One which refers to the very, very early time, so 170 years ago. There's water lines which still survived, and the division of that dock. This is the water line again. We see the channel where U-boats were constructed during the World War I and during the World War II. And the division between those two shipyards, the canal created by man for transporting wood, because area before the shipyard was created was used for storage of wood. The dock for constructing ships in horizontal slips, and maybe more important for the recent history, the place when Lech Wałęsa was working in his workshop. This is arrangement of the interior. He was invited to open it. The furniture is not authentic, but more or less the same. A few years later, he wasn't happy with the state of protection. Now there is a workshop for conservator of furniture. And most exciting, the area of mold loft. The all equipment which was used until the 70s still exists. On that frame, the plywood panels were standing, and the technical drawings were projecting using optical method for arrangement of scale 1:1 patterns. The patterns were then drawn using pencils and then were cut it by workers on steel. There's a lift to the downstairs, and this is a very important person, the conservator of the province, which is partly in charge of preservation the site. The last launching, not so far ago, 8 years ago, the process is very quick, and the workers decided to use the completely useless today equipment for launching ships. Of course, different technology is used. From the Second World War, very bad memories. 3 concentration camps had their divisions on the shipyard, which was run by Nazi. Structure during the Second World War for only one purpose, for mounting the main engine of U-boats. There is some documentation of those camps, material and means of those shelters, and they are converted by the young generation for joy. This is contribution to that period of the war arranged by the artists from Scotland. And recent funding, the real U-boat, which was covered in ground and survived till now as a curiosity. The first launching after the Second World War, actually the first ship, which was built here, which is now the museum ship. The importance is expressed by postmarks, or were postmarks. In my opinion, the techno-aesthetics are very important for appreciate the technical monuments. There was a master photographer employed in the shipyard for 50 years. He made a lot of reporting pictures, but as well he made objects of art in terms of his photographs. Artists were living from 2002 to 2008, and they documented the process of disintegration and destruction of the structures. Most moving was the wall painting, but does not exist. This is a fence between city and the shipyard, because the artist decided that when shipyard is vanishing, her painting should vanish as well. There are flowers which were arranged on the shipyard. These are connectors to the piping for 4 different gases, compressed air, oxygen, steam, and acetylene. And there is a place when people still can eat. That picture is very rare. It is, of course, against the law of safety and healthy work, but it was. What will be on the area? This is one of proposal. Shipyard is disappearing between new structures. Only new development opened last autumn is the structure of the building of the authority. It was permanent. It is the last moment of the shipyard, Gdańsk Shipyard. The design of the building and the conclusion of advisory board of ICOMOS to the World Heritage Committee, which says not to inscribe into World Heritage List. This is very sad message. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much. The scheme of our panel is that we will come back in the very end to comments and questions. So thank you once again. It was really fascinating to see so many layers of the heritage in this place.
Indeed.
Indeed, really. So let me go to another topic. I hope that already are connected our guests from Ukraine, Hello. I have a great pleasure. Hello. I have a great pleasure to welcome our guests Anastasya Ponomaryova and Oleksandr Anisimov. And their topic is Heritage or Spectacle, Socialist Postmodernism and Industrial Landscapes as a Symbolic Resource for New Development in Kyiv. So please start your presentation. You're welcome.
So I just don't see the presentation itself.
I'm so sorry. I didn't. I've just small remarks from the technician. Thank you very much. It's the afternoon session. I feel more exhausted. Very sorry. I didn't introduce you. Sorry. Very sorry. Yeah. Just please forgive me. Okay, that's obvious that first of all, I have to introduce you to our public. Anastasya is the head of NGO Urban Curators Initiative. She is also the co-founder of this Urban Curators from 2015, and since then she has engaged in all conceptual projects with a special focus on revitalizing post-industrial areas. And our second guest, our second speaker, Oleksandr Anisimov, is urban researcher at Brno in Line, an independent research institution working on integrated urban research in Ukraine and beyond. He's also co-author of the Integrated Strategy of Development of the Podil district in Kyiv. And since 2017, he has been leading the NGO Understanding Soviet Podil, focus on research, preservation and dialogue about the built heritage of the 20th century in this area. Sorry again. So,
Thank you, very kind for the introduction. So this collaborative research of ours was and is based on the common interest in urban design and urban planning in the derelict post-industrial areas. Podil has been the focus of our research and activities for many years now. However, the postmodernist part, we will not discuss it as much as our kind of innovative or hopefully innovative re-evaluation approach to the post-industrial landscape of the territory. I'd like to for Anastasya to start with the contextualization of our case in time, space, and what is also for us very important, the planning context, the urban planning context, and the socio-political context in which the Podil industrial area is situated today. Anastasya?
Yeah, the territory we're gonna talk about today, and happy to share the research and our kind of brief and rough ideas for the future. It's post-industrial Podil area in Ukrainian capital Kyiv, and this territory was planned and mainly formed during the Soviet period, when during the time when Kyiv was considered as an ideal industrial socialistic city with up to 20% of the area transformed into highly productive industrial zones. So the planning concept of those times was a factory-centric and this idea was successfully implemented for the area we're going to talk about today. As I said, it was planned at the beginning of 20th century, and particularly in 1936, when the first general plan for Kyiv was defined, and it continued to be developed by the end of 20th century. Concentration of enterprises, convenience manufacturers, and plants was like the main core. And in addition, there was an idea to use natural sources such as the river and Kyiv Hill, which now surrounded this area, and to separate the industrial area from the housing. Those were the planning core idea, which now creates a big challenge, planning challenge for for community. Yeah. Today, according to current master plan of Kyiv, this territory you might see on the picture on the right side is defined as the biggest industrial district, occupying around 800 hectares. And the planning idea of our current master plan, general plan, is so-called limited and car-oriented, where a historical streets started their life in even a pre-revolutionary time has to be turned into automobile roads with double traffic lines and so on and so forth. And so we consider this current legislation and ruling are very poor, and which are also kind of ignore the industrial heritage and culture aspect of this area, and also a social one. So in addition to this general plan I already mentioned, there is also like the developer-driven detailed plan, which do these things which the general plan does. So opposed to this situation, we would like to consider this area as an industrial landscape, which has a different quality aspects as a cultural, historical, urban special values, and also social values. And namely, temporary initiatives and grassroots initiatives are already happening there. So we are looking at the area which cannot long exist like the original planning idea, but has not yet received a new planning vision. An area that cannot be developed without the updated urban design concept and without research in particular. In addition, it's also a very interesting area for the research, for interdisciplinary research, because there are so many processes, transforming and quite experimental projects are happening there. So we might call them sporadic because they are disconnected between each other. They does not have any like good special value. They does not connect this industrial area with the living zones which now are surrounding this post-industrial territory. In particular, you might see the river from the east, which cut, I mean, not the river, but the port area along this river cut the upcoming, this post-industrial territory from the water. You might see on the left the green hills, a very beautiful green landscape, quite dilapidated, but which with a great potential. And it's also not connected, and any of the mentioned projects are not solving this problem. So we selected different cases, which altogether represent the kind of split urban processes in Kyiv to some extent, and the kind of they take advantage of from absence of planned planning idea for this district. The first one is quite unique because it has its pharma brewery and it has architecture and planning qualities at the same time, because it's situated on the border between historical Podil, which now is quite vibrant area with many activities happening there, and this huge post-industrial territory. And moreover, it has a historical background, and this is the popular spot for different initiatives, researchers, and even international workshops. But however, it does not lead to nothing. Nothing happened there, and the private owner, it does not go to the plan for utilization, and the future is not clear for this building. Opposed to this creation. The pharma industrial factory, which has the same architectural quality, was reconstructed into a nightclub, and the project implies some preservation of previous industrial quality. However, this territory is quite closed and used mostly for night activities and some very targeted art events. The next represents a quite rare case of grassroots initiative happening on Podil, and represented mostly by activities and initiated by NGO Kosmotabir. This organization occupies of 5-floor pharma industrial building on Podil, and they have a mission to protect development of these green hills nearby. I already mentioned. In addition to their culture agenda, which is about just operating the courtyard of this territory and renting them for different cultural activities. The owner is trying to sell this building for many years, and those renters try to do a very cheap and minimal design transformation of spaces for their needs. The last cases, last 5 cases, are going to be about kind of private reconstruction, and they have in common the low quality of strategic decision and the idea to get a money back in a very fast in a speed rate. This one represents the idea of very utilitarian approach for industrial building construction. You might see that the general shape is saved, and this long 100 meters buildings kind of stay in the same proportion. However, the quality of facade is very poor, and and the history of the also ignored and forgotten. The next case is even more strange and weird in our opinion, because it's a very gated office and business center. The private owner is unknown, and there is no information about the actual operation of the building. However, we see that from the picture from interior that there was an intention to kind of copy or replicate the loft style, their industrial style somehow to in a way they just see it, the architect saw it. Next case is not happened yet. There is just a project for reconstruction of Kyiv automobile repairing factory, which situated on Podil as other samples, and it's quite interesting case about in-between processes happening right now, and it's mainly about their grassroots initiative occupying the one of the pavilion of this factory, and with the idea to do a kind of to push this initial project, which you might see on the right side a little bit further, with the idea to kind of reimagine the industrial value of this territory, and to keep some action of this temporary and in-between processes for the future. And we're quite pessimistic with Oleksandr about this strategy, because this initiative are quite vulnerable, and seems like they're gonna disappear very soon, because there is no good mediation processes between grassroots initiative and developers. This housing, a new housing, already reconstructed on a pharma, again, brewery factory on Kirill streets. And we can mention the idea of copying the loft style on the facade. And we also find this project like referring to postmodernism quarters, which are nice, but in a very like poor aspect. So we can mention their intentions to like at least to be referred to the context, but we did not find any kind of deep understanding with and implementation of this idea. So all of these cases represent a very like kind of sporadic, as I said, and disconnected project. It seems like there is no dialogue between sectors and players, but what is more important, any of the common like territories idea for creating these common territories are not considered. For instance, this project for a new housing units are going to be reconstructed on the former brick factory. Does not consider the green territory, the huge green territory, which are now dilapidated and abandoned, but might be a great green belt along the Podil, historical part of the Podil and industrial Podil. So, and this is a great, this is great opportunity missed opportunities are missed in this housing project we referred here on this page.
We want
Oleksandr?
still to be projective, maybe critically projective, but still projective with the logic of our analysis. And we don't want to be caught reflecting only on the past or ad hoc experimenting for the only contemporary means, but we want to look forward and just, it's not switching next slides. I don't know, maybe somebody has cut off control. So we are well aware of the global processes happening, of the financialization of economy, of the real estate becoming a very lucrative business, and the pressure on the political and urban structure to accommodate the new growth appearing, as well as kind of increased inter-urban competition and creative economies that are in focus now for urban development projects. But what is important now in the local conditions that they mediate the global processes, and exactly in the post-socialist in Kyiv conditions, the weak municipal governance, absence of strategic planning instruments, untransparent land ownership, and vulnerable civil society are among the mediating contextual principles that are kind of mediating the logic of how the global processes appear in this post-industrial landscape. The thing is that as a result, we observe kind of very common repercussions where we see spatial and social segregation, patterns of land use, compatibility of adjoining functions, a lot of things we've touched upon earlier. Critically projective means that there is still hope and potential of this area, and not only of this area, but of this typology of landscapes. So we want to use the best practices, what is there, what is already there, as a really existing approach to renewal, which is basically this patchwork redevelopment, and kind of base it on another thing, which we call equitable post-industrialism. So how can equitable post-industrialism be understood? So in this case of analysis, we just simply put the projects on coordinate plane with the axis representing sustainability and contextuality challenges. Of course, not all of these projects reach the needed or the desired level of integration, level of their sustainability focus, but some of them are. And even though these projects should serve more or less as a beacons of what we expect or how we expect this territory to develop, we also understand that, that we need to work with all of the cases. We need to serve some kind of an offer for every of these cases. And this is the idea where we actually form a logic of every case having something to offer, to integrate in this post-industrial landscape, which is there, which is valuable to identity of citizens, which is valuable to the spatial qualities of the area, and to offer this normative idea of how to integrate all of the best aspects of the existing projects together, which is a very important, again, that we have this normative idea, that there is something there which we can use as an overarching approach, or overarching logic, which we call equitable post-industrialism. Basically, it's in a way pretty simple, pretty generic things connected to critical attention to industrial heritage, complicacy of spatial and integration of urban planning with the design of the space, also the cultural appropriation, circular economy in focus, and the very important needs of the focus of this post-industrial revitalization on social needs over investment return. So in other words, we can also explain this approach with the two quotes. The first one is being the landscape is history made visible. And here we mean that landscape is history and it creates history in the future. By defining characteristics of landscape to be preserved, to be integrated, and to be safeguarded, means having some kind of a common framework to work further. The other quote is that plans are worthless, but planning is everything. That is also increasingly important with these multiple stakeholder arrangements all over the place, that planning as a process of dialogue, planning as a continuous process, makes much more sense and makes much more evidence to help people to get to the fact, to the construction, to the revitalization processes. And in our opinion, taking this approach with the cases that the street, and also not only this street, but other developing places in Kyiv and other cities could also serve as a catalyst of new districts. Having a very coherent landscape logic behind the revitalization, and keeping in mind the aspects of critical equitable post-industrialism, we can expect the street to develop as a coherent project which will serve the interests of the citizens, not only of the stakeholders present there, but integrating their interests and their specific features together. We want to thank you. Hope we'll have a nice Q&A session after.
And no, I was not, my voice was too silent. So once again, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation and speech. And now I hope it's already connected with us, Mrs. Adrianna Brechelke. Is it the right pronunciation for your name?
Yes, Brechelke.
Once again?
Brechelke.
Brechelke. Okay, fine. So your topic is the resurrection of Kolobrzeg, the adaptation of the city to its new post-war function and reality. And let me introduce you to the public. Adrianna is an architect, visual artist, specialist in the Office of the City Historic Preservation. Currently, she is a PhD student at the Poznań University of Technology Doctoral School at the Faculty of Architecture and Urban Planning. Her research focuses on the history of architecture of areas incorporated into Poland after Second World War. So please feel free to begin.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your introduction and, of course, the opportunity to present my topic, which is related to one of the best-known seaside touristic city, and you can see it in the beginning of the post-war time. Let me just begin. The military operations carried out as the part of the Pomeranian offensive in 1945 led to defeat of the German forces in Pomerania, and as a result of the fierce fighting for Kolobrzeg, which ended on March 18th, the fortress city was captured, which was celebrated on the same day with a symbolic act of the marriage to the sea. The destruction were connected with the ring system defense used by the German army to slow down the attack of the Red Army and the Polish army. The symbolic act of the bringing the area of today's West Pomerania back to the motherland was the ceremony of the Poland's wedding with the sea. However, the Red Army War Command decided to close the town for civilians because the captured areas were in a bombing danger zone, and the completely destroyed and mined town did not meet the conditions for a living. The Soviet soldiers were robbing in this time and setting fires, as well as the German population, which was resettled after the Potsdam Conference in 1946. This situation made it impossible for the Polish administration to begin work in Kolobrzeg, and the Red Army forced them to move to the nearby undamaged city Karlino. From there, until the 1st of June 1945, the city and the county authorities worked to recruit the officials and administratively organize the basis of the life in the city. With the transfer of the Kolobrzeg, Stefan Lipicki became the first Polish mayor. The condition of the city was catastrophic. The large part of the damage was on the land situated on the east side of the Parsenta River, which divided the Kolobrzeg in half. According to the report of the Regional Planning Office in June 1945, the damage of the Kolobrzeg, the city and its infrastructure amounted to 85%. Potential places for the supply of work and the initiation of the economic development also seriously damaged. The scale of the Kolobrzeg was such that there was a question as to appropriateness of the rebuilding the city within its former boundaries, and there were also considerations of leaving the ruins as such as historical witness. The best preserved part of the town was the quarter of the single-family buildings in the western part of the town, and also the eastern part of the health resort district was also undamaged. The city authorities had to struggle not only with the problem of rebuilding, but also with the establishing of the foundations of social and economic life. The general lack of the security caused not only by the danger of collapsing destroyed buildings, but also by acts of the robbery, rape, and murder added to the destabilization to the city. According to the report of the first citizens, corpses were still found in the streets, in the Parsenta River, and in destroyed buildings, which, given the time of the year, increased the risk of the epidemics. Not only spatial, but also organizational chaos was described. The barricaded roads, as well as the demolished bridges and stolen rails, were a serious transportation problem. First of all, actions were taken to improve the sanitary conditions of Kolobrzeg. The streets and the buildings that were usable began to be cleaned up. And there was a decision to renovate the waterworks, providing the drinking water. During this time, the first workshops also were opened. The town board and its 1947 meeting postulated the planned reconstruction based on the plans that take into account the fishing character of the port, the needs of state institutions, the local government, and the spatial planning. However, these plans were very general, focused on economic development issues. The basic functions of the city, connected with its centuries-old tradition, were initially established. The ability to make decisions in Kolobrzeg and the progressive cleaning up the area resulted in increasing the number of inhabitants. In September 1945, around 800 Poles arrived to the city. Later migration in the first post-war years included the repatriants from the borderlands and also the people from the Warsaw and its surroundings. About 31.4% of the people came mainly from the Bydgoszcz, Lublin, and Poznań provinces, and the remaining 26% were of unknown origin. The most numerous group of the migrants were persons wishing to improve their economic situation and looking for a place to settle. The second group consisted of returning forced workers from Germany and, of course, the repatriants. The dynamic of the post-war migration movements and the lack of organization was associated with the uncontrolled settlement of Kolobrzeg. The impossible to estimate number of inhabitants had a negative impact on the distribution of the work and the food. In order to organize and control the inflow of the settlers, the Department of the State Repatriation Office was established in 1945. This made it possible to systematize the work, estimate and prepare living quarters for the inflow of the people. At first, the city's layout, or rather it remains, generated a problem in creating a homogeneity or a sense of the community. The fragmented, single and multi-family housing did not form an independent estate units. This made it difficult to create economic service or socio-cultural activities. Social development was mentioned in the report of the work of the second mayor of the Kolobrzeg, Stanisław Brożek, for the period from September to October, which speaks about the creation of the foundation and the functioning of the city and the creation of the first trade unions. Despite the diversity of the people who came to Kolobrzeg, they took many initiatives to create optimal living conditions and a new multicultural community based on the mutual assistance. During the meetings of the housing councils, there were active discussions on social issues. The integrating populations began to organize their neighborhoods and their apartments. As a result of the stabilization of the city in 1947, the first attractions on the citizens were created. For example, the cinema or periodical dance parties, and an increase of the number of cultural and educational institutions such as schools or libraries. The development of the new space was especially important given the fact that many of the people arriving to the city had lost their possessions, family, and the centuries-old heritage. Helena Hoffman, one of the first inhabitants in Kolobrzeg, gave a very telling and illustrative report on the adaptation and the kind of domestication of her acquired apartment. So the caring neighbors boarded up the window into rooms and the kitchen with the boards from some old closet. They brought a big wooden bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a small cupboard, and so we were comfortably furnished. The apartment began to take on the appearance of the home that we had been deprived for the 6 years. A very important aspect of this memory is the motive of kind of catharsis of accumulated emotions, doubts, and fears. The apartment gave hope for the stabilization and relative peace after the 6 years of the war. This made it possible to bear the enormous difficulties of the first month of life in the Kolobrzeg. The wider activities related to adapting the space surroundings of the newly arrived residents also influenced the perception of the city. Cleaning up, decluttering of the streets that were important for the residents, or even changing the names of the streets had a positive effect or impact on their adaptation and realization of their needs. Activities in the public space, such as the reconstruction of the lighthouse and the creation of the memorials, despite the propaganda overtones, contributed to a growing sense of unity with the city. As a part of the residents' spontaneous activities, the German monuments began to be transformed and adapted to the mark of the new Polish history. For example, the monument of the gratitude for those who died for fighting for Kolobrzeg was erected on the base of the monument honoring the citizens who died in 1870 during the war with France. Individual and local government initiatives were within the framework of the policy towards the Western territories, which was signaled in the act of the Poland marriage with the sea. During this ceremony, the Lieutenant Colonel Piotr Jaroszewicz said, in this place where you see the fortress walls, there once stood a Slavic stronghold. Hroby founded the bishopric of Kolobrzeg. This is eternally Polish land. Remember, this is history. One day, future generation will speak about this day with respect, just as we speak about our great ancestors. You are making a history. Piotr Jaroszewicz's speech is an attempt to begin the creation of cultural heritage of the Western lands. It reflects the ideology of the so-called Western and Northern lands. It was implemented across the entire territory of recovered territories, but in Kolobrzeg it took a symbolic meaning through this ceremony. The use of traces of past ages and the adoption of the concept of the ancient Polish lands was also intended to justify their incorporation into Poland. The propaganda pressure by the communist authorities to create traditional and to think in terms of the Poland's interest led to gradual acceptance the border changes. The rebuilding of the Kolobrzeg was overshadowed by the conservation discussion concerning the Western territories as early as 1945. At first, only the larger cities with the potential of importance were considered in discussion of the viability of the reconstruction. In Wrocław, in 1945, for example, the question of reconstruction damaged buildings was raised because it was believed that the reconstruction of the buildings was only justified in the case of historically significant monuments. Later buildings made by the Prussian and German legacy were problematic and not fully aligned in the propaganda idea of the Polish roots. In publication, Jan Zachwatowicz touched the subject of rebuilding the Western cities, from which one we can conclude that the Kolobrzeg was not a priority city for the reconstruction. And he said, for the reconstruction in the old forms, there were no adequate premises, among other sufficient historical documentation. Therefore, the plan developed only provided by the general preservation of the layout or the direction of the old streets and the rebuilding on valuable historical buildings. The issue of the rebuilding the Western territories was raised again in 1948 by Wacław Podlewski. He classified the historic towns and indicated the basic postulates used in the creation and later development. He pointed out the necessity of preserving the medieval street network through appropriate shaping of architecture, including modern architecture, and the necessity of making practical use of the remaining historical buildings. He divides cities into three groups. The first one, undestroyed cities. The second one, destroyed cities with preserved good architecture. And the third one, destroyed cities with preserved historic plan, but rebuilt architecture. According to this classification, Kolobrzeg was placed in the third category due to its dynamic development in late 19th century. During the conference of the Regional Spatial Planning Department in Szczecin in 1948, in order to priority for the cities was once again determined due to the urgent need of the reconstruction as a result of the economic development. Of the three groups defining the order, Kolobrzeg this time was placed in the first priority group. The preservation of the logical street layout supported by the centuries of experience in the face of enormous destruction of the city was not only a practical solution, but also allowed to the preservation of the heritage that had been created over the centuries. The 6-year plan for the economic development and the building for the foundations of the socialism passed in 1950s indicated for the first time at the national level necessity of rebuilding the Kolobrzeg and concentrating on the development industry. As part of the 6-year plan, in the same year, a repair and the construction company was created, which rapidly increased the expansion of the city and scale of the repairs. Process of the reconstruction and urban was held back by large-scale brick recovery operation. In 1952, the Presidium of the government passed the resolution continuing the demolition action to obtain the demolition bricks for the rebuilding the Warsaw. On this basis, the action of demolition works was extended. Quantity of bricks coming from the so-called recovered territory was set at the 96%. In Kolobrzeg, this led to the demolition of the two neo-Gothic churches, St. George and St. Martin. Additionally, to the dissatisfaction and criticism of the population, only the ruined cathedral was left standing. A positive impulse for the Kolobrzeg development was the reactivation of the resort in 1952 and the creation of the first sanatorium such as Słoneczko, which means sunshine, which treated children. The district conference of the Polish United Workers' Party in 1956 and the inflow of the funds given by the state authorities for the reconstruction allowed for the further acceleration of the reconstruction process. By 1957, the clearing of the rubble from the city and the securing of the buildings had been completed, and the functioning of the Kolobrzeg had been restored. As a result, the city entered the new stage of the development in accordance with resolution of the Economic Committee of the Council of the Ministers. This resolution honors the work done by the Kolobrzeg authorities and reflects their positive assessment of the city. The symbolic of the place where Poland was married to the sea in the face of catastrophic destruction did not initially influence the decision concerning rebuilding, and the rebuilding itself was mainly the effort of people looking for their home in Kolobrzeg. The ideology of those noted territories only began to have an impact in early 1950s due to the small scale of the city. Despite the fact that the city had been completely destroyed, the functioning of the city was resurrected, and the rebuilding meant that the historical urban structure was re-established and the former functions of the city were fully restored. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So our last topic for today is Brno. So I hope the Lenka Štěpánková is already connected with us. Hello.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
I am connected.
Nice to
Good
meet you.
Good afternoon to everybody. Hello to everybody. Good afternoon.
Okay, let me introduce you. Lenka Štěpánková. Is it right pronunciation of your name?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks. Is an architect working for the Trade Fairs Brno company since 2003. Her main responsibility is coordination of Brno Exhibition Center master plan with the city planning documents. In addition, she participates in the research into the historical pavilions of the exhibition center and is involved in the promotion of its culture and historical value. Since 2016, she has been a PhD candidate in the Urban Design Department at the Faculty of Architecture at the Brno University of Technology. The subject today is Brno Exhibition Center, Architectural Legacy and Current Problems of its Vital Preservation for the Future. So please be free to begin.
Thank you for your introduction. What I would like to see you today is the exhibition center as such, and I would like to do a bit of contextualization, showing the exhibition center in the context, and then I would like to describe some problems pertaining the heritage preservation in Czech Republic and in Brno especially. So from the beginning, I would like to describe the situation in Europe in the 1920s, then to show the history of Brno Exhibition Center in particular, and then move to the problems of its preservation. When we start in the 1920s, we can see from this brief diagram that it was the period when a permanent trade fair center and exhibition center started to emerge across Europe, because before the big exhibition were always done just on the temporary sites. But in the 1920s, the cities started to establish permanent trade fair and exhibition venues. And we can see that was, for example, the case of Leipzig in Germany or the Köln am Rhein. Both are the important trade fair centers until today. And as well, the same was the case of Milano in Lombardy. And here we can also see the Czechoslovak pavilion, which was built at Milano Trade Fair Center, and some other pavilions. And we can see that Czechoslovak presence on international scene was in the 1920s and 30s very strongly associated with modern architecture. What is also interesting is the similarity or resemblance between Brno and Poznań, because in both cities The exhibition center was either established in case of Brno or rebuilt and enlarged, that was the case of Poznań, for the big national exhibition, which was to commemorate the anniversary of independent state in both cases. In Poznań, they have actually done the exhibition to commemorate this anniversary po pierwszy raz. So this exhibition, Powszechna Výstava Krajová in Poland and Všeobecná výstava soudobé kultury in Brno, they were both the reason to establish permanent exhibition centers. And in both cities, we still have the trade fair company operating today. But of course, in the 1920s, Brno, with its exhibition center, was also facing the competition of Prague, where there was historical exhibition center from the end of the 19th century. And also, they have the brand new exhibition palace built in the 1920s, which was later reconstructed in 80s and 90s. And today, it's the home of National Gallery. So it's still the exhibition place, but doesn't serve the trade fairs anymore. So Brno Exhibition Center was from its very beginning intended to be, and actually was, the manifesto of modern architecture. We can see the urban layout was sort of traditional or classic, but the building themselves were very modern, most of them, almost all of them. And we can see the main pavilion with its reinforced concrete parabolic structure and the original exposition in the 1920s. Then we can see some other pavilions. Among them were the pavilions of Brno City and Moravian region, and the smaller structures were the pavilions of art schools, of School of Fine Arts and School of Applied Arts, or Academy. Then there was another big pavilion with the view tower, and that was also another example of quite advanced structure because it had a bearing lift shaft from reinforced concrete, and the glass facade was hung from above. And this structure was also published in Bruno Taut's book Die Neue Baukunst in Europa in America. So we can see that was considered to be very progressive and worth publishing in its time. And these are the buildings we still have at the exhibition center today, as well as these buildings by Emil Kralik, another important Czech architect. And this is the cinema and theater with cafe and the entrance building. And we also had, because the architects in the 1920s was very interested in the building and question of living and building, we have some examples of model houses, model family house and model apartment house. The one building which doesn't survive and was later destroyed is model electric farm. And the whole Brno Exhibition Center was said to be strongly influenced or inspired by Stuttgart exhibition, which took place 1 year before in 1927 by the Waisenhof Siedlung. And according or inspired by the Waisenhof, in Brno was built also the model colony, model housing estate called New House. And what is quite interesting is that it was not the municipality initiative, but the private sector initiative. It was actually built by two private builders who invited young architects and famous architects and commissioned them to build these model houses and show them to the public with the exhibition. Fortunately for Brno Exhibition Center, the site was not damaged that much like other exhibition centers across Europe during the Second World War. And in the 50s, it was rebuilt for the national industrial trade fairs. And again, we can see the similarities across Europe. We can see the Beograd new exhibition center from the late 50s. We can see the new hall built in Bucharest and Dortmund's Westfalenhalle, another such an example of the big structures built for industrial trade fairs. So we can again see there are similarities across Europe. And that reminds me what I've heard here before earlier about the fortification landscape, about the fortresses across Europe. This is the similar. When we look at one country, we can see just one or two exhibition centers, and the similarities are not really striking. But when we are looking across Europe, we are starting to see the pattern, and the similarities just start to emerge. So that's why I wanted to do this bit of contextualization. Sorry. So these are the buildings that we have at Brno Exhibition Center, the big pavilions from the 50s and also the office building. And what I have to say is in the 50s, the buildings from the pre-war period, from the 20s and 30s, were still regarding to be contemporary architecture. And they were appreciated just for their architectural qualities, not for their historical values. And that changed since the 1960s. And in the 70s and 80s, the buildings started to be reconstructed and also care about not only as a piece of architecture, but also regarding their historical value. So we have the examples of how the exhibition center and its building evolved in the time. This is one of the buildings they changed from the 50s. They changed the facade in the 80s, and they added the connecting corridor in the 1990s. There is another example of the building which was from the 1920s, which was enlarged in the 50s. And today, usually, we don't see the later intervention as a disturbing, because they more or less follow the purpose the building was used to, and they're using, especially the additions from the 50s, are mostly using the same techniques and materials. So today they sort of naturally blend with the historical context. There is another example how exhibition center evolved in time. In some cases, the historical buildings were knocked down and replaced by modern halls bearing the same name, but actually being completely different structure. But this way, there is a continuity, historical continuity still present. And as the place still serves the same purpose, we can see that even if it's still changing, it's on the other side still remaining the same. That is another example, the building reconstructed with new facade, escape staircase added, but more or less it's still the same historical building. That's the case of another pavilion. We can see some minor changes on facade and the connecting corridor, but still the same building. And the main pavilion, it's the same case. So what we have today at the exhibition center are the modern halls at one part, western part of the exhibition center, and the historical part, eastern historical part, facing the city center with many historical buildings. And last but not least, this is the protected buildings, the historical buildings. And last but not least, we have one historical building, the only one which preceding the existence of exhibition center, and that's the historical chateau residence of industrialist Victor Bauer, who commissioned Adolf Loos to design him the interior of this residence. So it was sort of hidden for decades in the exhibition center, but just the last or recent research showed us that that was actually the biggest commission Adolf Loos have done in his hometown, in his native town. So that's also quite interesting thing to have and valuable thing to have at the exhibition center. Now, when we know what there is to preserve and the reason why worth preserving. The question is how, and I would like to mention briefly some problems that heritage care and heritage preservation faces in Czech Republic and Brno especially. It was, like in other countries, first the preservation of historical monuments was the matter undertaken by architects and art historians, but in the 50s it started to be organized or embedded into the state institution. We had the first monument law in the 1958, and then the new one in 1988. First, just the individual buildings were protected, and since the late 1980s, also the urban areas, and in the early 1990s, the Brno city center, as well as other historical city centers in Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia then, were declared urban conservation areas. But what happened later was the fact that it became clear that in the late 80s, the bureaucrats didn't follow the right process when listing the buildings. And this problem appears in about 2015 year. And what is strange, it wasn't the private developer who took the case to the court, but the regional municipality who were undertaking the task of rebuilding historical hospital. And the court decided that these buildings are not listed historical monuments anymore. And it's the case of about 700 buildings just in Brno and twice as much in the South Moravian region. So that's the problem the heritage movement is facing just now. And they also try to introduce the new conservation areas, partly hoping that this will solve the problems with unlisted buildings. We can see the size of newly proposed zones compared to the historical city center, which is already the protected area. We can see the size of the exhibition center compared to the city center and to the newly proposed zoning. But the problem is that the whole process is taking very, very long time. We can see the dates. It started, the intention appeared in 2003, and we are still debating the zones. So in case of Brno Exhibition Center, and it's little known fact that actually the whole exhibition center was declared to be the listed protected monument. And it was exactly in the 1990s where exhibition company management started to rebuild the exhibition center or modernize the exhibition center. So while doing all this modernization, on the background there was going on the process of unlisting the exhibition center, because it meant also the modern buildings without a value were listed. And when I come to, so in the end, what we have at the exhibition center, sorry, I did some wrong click. What we have is just the complex of what we are at the moment, what the exhibition center is. It's a complex of protected building, not the area. That's the result of the process. And what I see as a problem with heritage protection, it's sort of having two blind spots. One of them is lack of acknowledgement of the context, which means the architectural value, and not only architectural value of single buildings, but sort of intangible value of the exhibition center as a whole in the European context. It's a problem to recognize that a part of its value lays in the fact that it's still functioning and operating exhibition center. That's very important. And the other problem is that the system of heritage protection is sort of a break in the system. I was struck when there was a presentation from Istanbul, and it was called the Urban Renewal Areas, because the documents translated to English from Czech to English always speaks about conservation zones, conservation areas, and we can all feel that there is a huge difference between renewal and protection and preservation and conservation. So the problem is with Brno Exhibition Center to use and redevelop and add value to its historical heritage and historical buildings. We need some force to drive the process. And the Monument Heritage Institute, they are doing, National Heritage Institute, they are doing the great job in promoting the value and describing the value, and they are, as I would say, doing the break in the system, so the historical value is not rolled up by the new development, but they are not able to present or to be the driving force. In this case, some driving force is still needed to add something new to the existing historical value. So that's my conclusion, and I am very glad I was able to hear some of the presentations here on this forum, because some of them are dealing with the same problem, and I sort of get some of the answers to the problems of heritage protection of such a complex site and complex urban area. That's more or less everything about the exhibition center and the problems we are facing. So what we have now, 19 architectural monuments and objects with a shared history of serving the purpose for organizing the exhibition and trade fairs. Then we have the new proposed urban conservation zones, which might help to protect the value, but unfortunately they are probably not the driving force and not giving the new impulse to this valuable site. So what we hopefully will try to find in Brno, and hopefully will find and achieve, is some development concept for the exhibition center for the future. So it still may stay the important trade fair business center, but with its historical potential unlocked and its historical value acknowledged. That's more or less everything from me. Now, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So, dear guests, dear listeners, we finished the afternoon panel, but it's now time for comments, questions. Let me check if we have anything on the chat page. Oh yeah, we are really happy to have among us Professor Ewa Chojecka. And there is 3 comments and questions from Professor. First, I think it's going to the Waldemar Affelt first speech and presentation. Magna Industria Maritima, engineering, construction are works of art. We value them according to the motto form follows function. Do you want to comment this? Because really, this is the unique value of what you present to us. There is a lot of interest in industrial buildings. There is also new range of the tourism now, industrial tourism, and there is a lot of interest to visit such places.
Of course, it is possible to comment and to answer, but maybe at first I will add that my purpose, but the purpose of my presentation was to provide kind of report of the history which was finished as the proposal to inscription into World Heritage List. And then there is maybe a feeling of a little disorder. Part of my presentation was about the aesthetics, and I mentioned involvement of artists. A few words how it was happened. In 2002, the leader of process of privatization of the entire area of shipyard decided to invite artists to stay on the certain properties, mainly the authority building, for flats, and to arrange their workshops. During the 6 years of full activities, the group consists of almost 200 people, big amount. Some of them were inspired by industrial environment of the shipyard. Some of them, they were consumed by that environment. I mentioned one artist who made murals. It was Ivona Zając, but she destroyed her object of art. So we have publications, but we do not have authentic part. And the second person, which is worth to be mentioned, is a photographer who just after finishing Academy of Fine Arts in Gdańsk became a citizen of shipyard, and he produced in 2013 the book of documentation of destruction process. Very frustrating book, but very necessary to convince not only public in Gdańsk, peoples of Gdańsk, or peoples of Poland, but as well officers, both national officers and local officers, that in their hands there is a huge responsibility whether we will keep that heritage for the future generation or they will agree to disappear that heritage. And the process of protection started actually after that book. But the book is a product of the arts.
I see. But I remember that Grzegorz Klaman made very interesting sculptures near the main, the gate called Second Gate. It was the gates to freedom. He called it.
2 gates. Number 1, number 2.
Yeah, 1, 2, and 3. 3 gates, as I remember.
2.
Two. And there is a problem because he made it in 2000, and now, as I realize, they are a little bit under disintegration. They are not in a good state. It's a really pity because they are so close to the European Center of Solidarity, and there is a problem who should take care of this. But I would like to come back to your reflections that really this terrain was such inspiring for many artists that for me it's not only the matter of the material heritage, it's also the very good case of intangible heritage, just because of energy and emotional impact which is in this terrain. So, but as I remember, when the European Center of Solidarity was built, there was also controversy because there were to build the center, some of the historic buildings, industrial buildings, were demolished. Am I right? Or?
There are two stories. Maybe I will start from the last one.
Okay.
It's a European Center. I show it on the picture, but I did not comment. The concept of develop that huge project as an interpretative museum of the shipyard, which is just next to that in authenticity, was the concept of the huge development of the post-industrial site into new purposes. So in that philosophy, it is understandable, but the philosophy can be changed. And now coming back to those two huge sculptures, which are called the gates to the freedom, yes. They are just in front of the new building, European Solidarity Center. Author did not take much care for them. They are located on the area which belongs to the city.
Okay.
It was not privatized. That strip of land so still is owned by the city. And I was one of the person who advocates for preserving them, register them as a monuments of the recent history. Because the artist, Professor Grzegorz Klaman, when he developed the concept, he was on that mode of the new time which is coming, new democracy, new kind of freedom. And it is a result of those thoughts of the time, thoughts 20 years ago, maybe a little forgotten, but very important then. And maybe if the huge sculptures will be converted into their previous action, because the action was to let people go through those sculptures into the shipyard area, facing at the first the health and safety hall as a first building, first object, which is now kind of small museum of the history of the shipyard. Different management of the Solidarity, European Solidarity Center, and different management for that small museum. There is a problem, a managerial problem, a little political problem.
I see. Yeah. So
A lot of problems on the site.
But maybe you are right. The most important issue is to gain the shipyard be listed on the UNESCO heritage list. That's the most important, and then maybe it will be easier to manage.
Yes. We were believing that fact of being listed will be much helpful for all owners, because there are only private owners of that area.
Yeah. It's caused lots of controversy.
And actually, most of them agreed. And they are waiting for the final decision. However, the final decision seems to be very less optimistic.
Oh, really?
Yes. Because at this moment, the advisory body to the UNESCO, which is ICOMOS, International Committee of the Monuments and Sites, finalize their opinion, which is expressed on 17 pages and has a very sad conclusion as a last sentence. The Gdańsk Shipyard should not be listed within UNESCO World Heritage List.
Jesus. Do you think it's such a really very, very crucial voice in this decision?
It is a procedural voice. It must be, World Heritage Committee must obtain such opinion. That opinion is handed to all members of the committee, 21 ambassadors, and the site to which is nominating. This is Poland in this case. So government can answer. Government can take different activities at this moment. I do not know what will be decided on the level of Polish government, what to do further. Anyway, that advisory body decision seriously make our nomination weaker.
That's very sad, really. I understand. Thank you for your comment. We come back to other Professor Chojecka comments, and now it's about Kolobrzeg. What is the stylistic value of the very few pre-war buildings within the new post-war town of Kolobrzeg? So the question goes to our guest.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. It's a really important question. And the remainings of the buildings include several Gothic tenement houses, and of course the cathedral and the tower, which remains the old city walls. And also a few 19th centuries have resort, and a few remainings of the fortification. And of course, there are several examples from 1930s of the housing. In the face of the scale of the destruction, they have very small value for the local authorities, and they were just to complete the needs to make the habitation for the new incoming people. So there's also another problem that there was no connection between them, especially in the stylish way, and of course with the aspect of the distribution of these buildings around the city. So the plans of the reconstruction was based only of the remains of the urban layout, which was the most important for the local governments. And the supplementary architecture is made up. Most of this architecture was made by the block of the flat from the 60s and 70s. And another and different situation is the case of the historical city center, because there was a destruction about 95% of the buildings. And there were two phases of the reconstruction. One, the modernist from the 60s, 70s, and the second one was the retroversion from the 80s to 90s, which referred to the medieval buildings rather than the 19th century buildings. So, so I think that there is no big connection with the remains architecture and the modern architecture which was created.
So I have one question, because I have to admit that I have some problem to hear you properly. Maybe you told about this, but there were any? Did you think there were any changes, visible changes in urban planning in Kolobrzeg after 1989? I mean, it was any efforts visible to combine, to connect the very specific society living in this city. It was a change because the propaganda before the 1989 just was not anxious to mention that was such a different components, different ethnic components in the city. And I'm curious, there was any visible impact on the urban planning to come back to think about this place as a place which should connect different memories of different groups.
Yeah, I understand you, but I need to tell that the urban structure, the plan of the streets or many other, is based on the 19th century and urban structure, which was layering by the earlier centuries. So only the changes with the of course, the new areas of the buildings with the block of flats on the suburbs of the city. But the center of the Kolobrzeg is staying in this form from 1930s.
Yeah, but mainly I thought about the expressing ideas to do something for this. I have to admit that I'm just back from the Lower Silesia, and I was really a little bit surprised that even after so many years, there is a lot of abandoned old German buildings there, and the new inhabitants don't want to keep them, and they try to demolish them and build them so-called styl dworkowy. So, which really, it's a shocking for to see the landscape with such a completely not harmonizing structures there. So sometimes it's very important to express the willingness to improve the ideas of architectural projects. So, sorry, I just thought about this. Maybe it was during your research you found such a document. Okay, so we are coming back to. Something wrong with my computer. Just a second. Let just disappear chat. Let me do it. I'm come back to our chat because I found other Professor Ewa Chojecka comments. We are very thank you for joining us. Oh my God, there's digital facilities sometimes are really strange when you want to do something quicker. No chance. I'm not sure I can see here. Maybe I will come closer. Yes, yeah. So there is about Brno. We traveled to Brno also to admire the Villa Tugendhat by Mies van der Rohe, a wonderful document of interwar modernity. Yeah, of course, today the main focus was on Brno exhibition center, but would you like to comment?
Yeah, of course. The fact is that Brno is full of modern architecture from the 1920s and 30s. Brno became, it was a strong industrial town, but in a cultural sense, it was also just a suburb of Vienna, a small town next to Vienna. But in the new Czechoslovak state, it gained importance, became the second largest city. Many new institutions were established or located in the city, including the new Faculty of Architecture, which was established in 1919. And it was especially the generation of young architects coming from the School of Architecture in Brno. And they started in the 1920s to change the city completely. And of course, the international stars like Mies van der Rohe came and make their signage or fingerprint in Brno. That's somehow similar to the Brno Exhibition Center because we have just some small single building there from many prominent names, prominent Czech architects being Gočár, Janák, Bohuslav Fuchs, many others. So what makes Brno unique is this collection of interwar modern architecture. And the people from Tugendhat Villa, when they have some guests from abroad, they always recommend them, among the places to see, they always recommend them to go and see Exhibition Center because there the modern architecture is really concentrated on one spot.
I have a question because during your presentation, I started thinking about have you ever considered to contact with Docomomo headquarters? They are the center. Docomomo is International Committee for Documentation and Conservation of Building Sites and Neighborhoods of the modern movement. And yeah, my God, this is a fantastic place. There is such
Yes,
great
yes,
names.
that's such a hidden place, and the reason is that until recently, the trade fair was operated as a private company, and it always is. And the situation changed somewhat in about 2015 because it became owned by the municipality. But until there was always the priority of exhibition company, of trade fair company. The priority always was doing business. And in a sense, it still is. We are doing business. And we are proud that we maintain all the historical buildings and heritage without any public funding, which is also amazing. But the situation is changing. The buildings are really in a need of new investment, new repairs, and at the same time, the city would like to highlight its exhibition center or make it more, make the citizens more aware of it and perhaps more proud of it, because the exhibition company focused very much on international audience, business people, not that much on the citizens of Brno city. So the new task is to somehow connect the exhibition center again with the city and promote its architectural value. And I think the good way is to start on international scene, on international stage, because when people from abroad appreciate it, then somehow people in the city started to appreciate it too.
That's
That's
true.
the point.
This is the mechanism. Very, very.
Yeah,
vivid.
how it works.
Yeah. Okay. But there is also a comment to you from Maciej Czarnecki. Lenka Štěpánková, very good conclusion. Thank you. Do you think we should extend the protection rules?
I must say I'm always on the side of a development, but on the side of the development, I'm the one on the side of the heritage. And as I have mentioned, I don't think we need more protection. We need perhaps more awareness and perhaps more courage to do the things. Because I really think that one of the value of the Brno Exhibition Center is it's still serving its original purpose. Because we can see other exhibition centers, I have mentioned the examples. For example, Leipzig, they have the Alte Messe Leipzig, they have the new exhibition center, and they are doing the renewal of the Alte Messe, old exhibition center. It's the same with Milano Campionara, also mentioned in my presentation. Today, it's the completely new living quarter with just 2 or 3 historical buildings left on the site. And it's more or less the example of Köln. They also have historical exhibition center converted to the administration district, commercial district. They don't have the historical exhibition center. We still have in Brno, it's quite a unique example, the mixture of functioning exhibition center and in the historical buildings, in a historical setting. And too many protection is sort of counterproductive because it doesn't allow to use the buildings for their purpose.
There's no questions, any comments to our guest from Ukraine, but I would like to ask you something, because as I understand, this is your research idea is to improve this area, yeah? And my simple question is, how do you think you could proceed with your idea to have practical impact of developers? How do you think it's possible? And maybe I didn't hear you quite properly because of the weak connection, but maybe you told about this, but just a simple question. Do you think is any practical way?
Do you hear me now properly?
Yes, yeah, I hear you. I had a problem with Anastasya.
So I just will start, and Anastasya could offer some kind of addition. So the key thing is that there is a lot of undiscovered heritage in there, and it's already being reused by local actors in the area. And the Kirillivska street as a hoard or as an axis binding the outer city districts with the inner city core is already a part of a big it is included in a development plan of the district, but which will never be ratified, which will never be this formal instrument will not help the actors to really do things. And the logic behind this is that this awareness, which was also a point, and not too much protection, could be an option for the stakeholders coming together, having an idea of a coherent plan that is better than them having all their own plots without any coherence, any inner logic that binds the character of the street, the character of the heritage, industrial heritage there, with their aspirations and their plans for the future. And by critically looking at it and showcasing for the developers and for the plot owners that coherent logic would help them to achieve much more in the sense of the quality of space, this is the logic we bear behind this, and that there is not single plan, but the planning process, the coming together with the different stakeholders we mentioned, that would improve the logic and would bring experts also, not only architects in their own, to the discussion table.
Yeah, thank you. I have an offer to our guests. Maybe just my leaflet. Just maybe you have questions to each other. So please free to start if you want to ask your colleague speakers to explain something. Any questions to each other?
I would like to just highlight what I have read in the chat as a comment about the fortresses, and that was from Natasha Uroshevich. I put it down that there is a great potential of valorization through international networking, and that's really amazing idea for me because we are more or less facing the similar problems, and I think the heritage care can do very well with single buildings, individual buildings, but we all facing the problem what to do with the urban areas, because when there is a value in the area, you need to, you can't just convert all the buildings into museums, because that wouldn't be financially possible. So you need to bring the new function to the site, to the area, and be it the historical part of the city or the industrial site, or in our case, exhibition site, exhibition center. So I see the big potential in sharing the experiences and showing the example around.
But you mean the fortress?
Not only to each other, but to other stakeholders involved.
But you mean the fortresses, yes?
Fortresses.
Yeah, I think that for me the great example is Olomouc, because you know, it's really like an integrated part of the city. You're really walking around, enjoying the greenery, and you just walking along the fortress. So that's amazing.
I was actually struck by the similarity between Olomouc and Krakow, the fortresses, because the same happened to me when I started to look at the history of exhibition centers across Europe. I was just struck by the similarities, the Messeturms, the view towers, and the main palaces, everything, because the similarity is very strong. So we can learn from the approaches as well.
So a lot of work for researchers. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Any more questions, comments? If not, I'm really very grateful for your participant, and it was great honor to have you as a speakers and guest. Thank you very much. Thank you for listeners, and you know, I think that we nearly finished our forum, so this is the last day. So we are looking forward another one in the future. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.